welcome you all from the media to the presentation of the concluding comments of the capacity building workshop for law enforcement agencies in Adamawa State on prevention and responses to sexual and gender-based violence, violence against women and girls, harmful practices, and the promotion of the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls in the states. As you can see, this workshop has been on for 2 days, and gathered here are representatives of key law enforcement agencies in the Nigerian Police, the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, and the Nigerian Correctional Services. So we have a full house. Introduction. The capacity building workshop for law enforcement agencies in Adamawa State on prevention of SGBV, violence against women and girls, harmful practices, and the promotion of sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls was convened by Center for Social Justice with the support of the European Union United Nations Spotlight Initiative, and it held here at Madugu Rockview Hotel, 10 Rockhaven Avenue, behind Government House, Yola, Adamawa State, on August 12th and 13th of 2020. The workshop is part of a series of activities under the Spotlight Initiative, which seeks to eliminate violence against women and girls with the overall vision of a Nigeria where all women and girls, particularly the most vulnerable, live a life free from violence and harmful practices. The workshop was convened to contribute to an outcome, and that is that national and subnational systems and institutions plan, fund and deliver evidence-based programs that prevent and respond to violence against women and girls and harmful practices in all sectors. And the expected outputs, which I believe we have realized, is that the capacities of law enforcement agents and prosecutors is strengthened to deliver services that prevent and respond to VAWG, SGBV, and harmful practices, especially for those groups of women and girls facing intersecting and multiple forms of discrimination. The objectives of the workshop have been drawn up from the consideration that law enforcement is central to the fulfillment of government's fundamental obligation to society, which is to maintain law and order and secure lives and property of citizens and residents. Therefore, the workshop has been designed to build capacity of the strategic law enforcement officials to have a deep understanding of what the laws have provided on these issues, and the purpose and principles of mainstreaming prevention and responses to them, as well as the challenges of operationalizing and mainstreaming these preventive and response measures. The workshop was also designed to review and ensure a proper appreciation of the emergent best practices and fit and good practices in law enforcement, as well as make recommendations for improvement for the future. We reviewed 5 principal papers. One is the purpose and principles of mainstreaming prevention and responses to issues that have arisen. 2 is the standards of law enforcement and the project team. 3 is best practices in prevention and responding to them. And 4 is the challenges of operationalizing and mainstreaming prevention and response. And the 5th one is the issue of mainstreaming gender in law enforcement in the light of these vices, issues, challenges, and the way forward. Of course, the participants, after listening to the papers, had a group discussion which focused on identifying gaps and challenges, emergent best practices, as well as low-hanging fruits for action in law enforcement in response to these challenges. Now, the workshop participants observed as follows. 1, that law enforcement agencies have a fundamental obligation to protect lives and property and to promote respect for the enforcement and enhancement of human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the rights to human dignity and non-discrimination for women and girls and vulnerable groups. The fulfillment of this obligation should entail freedom from SGBV, VAWG, HP for women and girls, and the promotion of their SRHR. There are several legal and policy provisions that protect women and girls from all these challenges. They include the Constitution, the Adamawa Penal Code, the Nigerian Police Regulations, the Universal Basic Education Act. At the international level, which is applicable in Nigeria, they include the United Nations Code of Conduct for Law Enforcement Officials, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Sustainable Development Goal 5, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and the Protocol to the African Charter of Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa. Of course, we have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as on economic, social, and cultural rights. We observe that the establishment of the Nigeria Police Force Gender Unit and the Civil Defense Gender Unit is a very welcome development with the capacity to drastically reduce gender-based violence. However, the gender units have not been adequately resourced. We also noted the practices within the police that discriminate against women. Some of these include that married women are disqualified from enlistment into the Nigeria Police Force. Women are compelled to stay 2 years on the job after enlistment before marriage, required to apply for approval to marry, and the fiancé is subjected to investigation and approval. Restricted choice of posting for police women. Police women are prohibited from wearing earrings, face powder, or lipstick. They are mandated to inscribe the alphabet W before their ranks and made to indicate that they are women. And they are given a special kind of force number to easily identify them as women. There are challenges of availability of forensic tools and experts for the investigation of violence against women and sexual and gender-based violence. And contrary to legal provisions, violence against women manifests in various dimensions in the home, in the community, public places, and places of work. And these include domestic violence, emotional violence, rape, sexual harassment in schools and workplaces, stalking, female genital mutilations to cutting, femicide, denial of education, disinheritance, widowhood practices, stigmatization, and shaming. And the violations of the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women manifest in forced marriages, child brides, teenage motherhood, forced pregnancies, denial of maternal care, including antenatal and self-delivery care, vesico-vaginal fistula VVF, unsafe abortion, and denial of use of contraceptives. It also manifests in the undue increase of the Nigerian population. We have a situation where the population growth outstrips economic growth. Now, sexual and gender-based violence are recognized obstacles to the achievement of equality, development, and peace, nullifies and impairs women's enjoyment of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. It is a global health challenge and causes physical, psychological, and economic harm and suffering to women and girls. There is a culture of silence, stigmatization, and shaming of women and girls who complain about sexual offenses, and this contributes to perpetrator impunity and the continuation of sexual and gender-based violence. Further to paragraph I above, overall, law enforcement practices and attitudes may not have been overtly supportive of victims and survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. Adamawa State recognizes in its penal code that 18 years is the age of majority and informed consent, and anyone below the age of 18 is deemed to be a child by law. Sex with any person under the age of 18 is criminalized by the Adamawa State Penal Code. We also noted that criminal investigations are pivotal for effective criminal justice adjudication, and there is a need for professionalism, objectivity, and integrity in the investigation and reporting process. And our final observation is that several low-hanging fruits are available in law enforcement for the realization of freedom for violence for women and girls in Adamawa State. Now we come to the more concrete issues, which is our resolutions. The first one is that the law enforcement agencies commit to redouble their efforts towards eradicating sexual and gender-based violence, violence against women and girls, and harmful practices, and also undertake to redouble the efforts to promote the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls. And interagency collaboration will be encouraged and strengthened. 2. They commit to the development of a common law enforcement standard operating procedure on SGBV, VAWG, and HEP, as well as specific gender policies for different law enforcement agencies. 3. Law enforcement agencies commit to provide information for the publication of details of offenders in the Sexual Offenders Register provided under the VAWG Act. 4. The Nigeria Police and NSCDC gender units should be adequately resourced with financial resources, capacity building for its personnel, and logistics support for these operations. Furthermore, there should be improved funding of the police and NSCDC, especially their forensic units. They also further commit to enhance participation in the activities of the Adamawa State Sexual Assault Referral Center and the Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Response Teams to ensure that they become a one-stop resource center for SGBV. They further commit to engage other stakeholders in the struggle against SGBV and the promotion of the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls. These stakeholders include the legal and medical professions, counselors, women's rights groups and associations, civil society organizations, religious and traditional institutions. They also commit to take preventive and adequate response to matters of domestic violence, emotional violence, rape, sexual harassment in schools and workplaces, stalking, female genital mutilation, femicide, denial of education, disinheritance, widowhood practices, stigmatization, and shaming. They further commit to take preventive action and adequate response to violations of the sexual and reproductive health and rights, especially those that manifest in forced and child marriages, forced pregnancies, denial of maternal care, including antenatal care and self-delivery care. And all these things have already been criminalized and penalized under the Adamawa State Penal Code, the new Penal Code. They also undertook to reverse the culture of silence, stigmatization, and shaming of women and girls who complain about sexual offenses. And they want to do this through sensitization of the public and a new culture of survivor-centered approach to policing and law enforcement. They also commit to the full implementation of the Adamawa State Penal Code on the provisions of the age of majority, so that anybody who has any sexual relationship with a child under 18 will be vigorously prosecuted. They also commit to improve criminal investigations through deploying impartiality, strict truthfulness, intelligence, respect, courtesy, patience, perseverance, persistence, professionalism, objectivity, and integrity in the investigation and reporting process of sexual and gender-based violence. So this, in a nutshell, are the issues that have been agreed. And my colleagues here from the different agencies can say one or two things to further buttress the communique that has been read out before the media will be asked to ask questions or seek clarifications.